In the NFL, there are certain things that you absolutely must have in order to have a great team. Outstanding GM, excellent head coach, top-notch quarterback. But one thing you must have is a whole bunch of dineros. And when it comes to the Detroit Lions, they just got a hell of a lot of good news in that department. We're going to talk about it. Stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. My friends, I normally don't make 2 episodes a day. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But the reason why I try not to is I don't want to wear you guys out with multiple episodes because sometimes I know that can be a little bit overwhelming. But in this case, this is one of those episodes where it's like, listen, I have to talk about it. This is big news. This is terrific news. And it's great news as to what it helps the Lions out with. And it also shows how they are absolutely one of the best franchises in the NFL. Bar none, no questions about it. What news am I talking about? According to a Twitter post that's been pushed out by multiple people, but probably the biggest person of noteworthiness has been Tom Pelissero, it has been informed by the NFL to the NFL owners that the 2025 salary cap is going to be anywhere between $277.5 million to $285.5 million. Now, let's understand something. That is a hell of a lot of money. But the reason why that number is so particularly impressive is because when you take a look at that range, that is a range that is going to increase the salary cap from anywhere between $22.1 million to $26.1 million. You guys have to think about it. Over the last couple of years, the salary cap has just absolutely gone through the damn roof. It has skyrocketed. And when you think about it, this is nothing but great news for the Lions. Honestly, it's great news for every team in the NFL, especially those that are really hurting for cap. But for the Detroit Lions, this is like getting early Christmas morning once again, because it's like, okay, let's understand what the Lions already had to work with going into this offseason. According to Over the Cap from today, the Lions had $51.8 million in total cap space, and they had $49.2 million in effective cap space. Only difference between the two is this. Total cap space is what is accounted for all cap space that you have. Effective cap space is after you have 51 players on the roster, draft picks, the whole 9 yards. So, let's understand something here. If we do some quick math, anything super strenuous or crazy, if you just take that 22.1 or 26.1 million and you add it to those 2 numbers I gave that are already from over the cap of 51.8 for total cap space or 49.2 for effective cap space, the Lions, once the cap number has officially come out, are going to have anywhere between $73.9 to $77.9 million worth of total cap space, and are going to have anywhere between 71.3 to 75.3 effective cap space. Holy crap. You want to talk about a freaking just boatload, freaking Scrooge McDuck bank of money. That is just absolutely ridiculous. But while that in of itself is impressive, why did I say this shows the true genius of the NFL, the true genius of the Detroit Lions to the NFL? Here's how it does. Because let's just keep something in perspective here. The Lions, I just got to tell you this right now. There were a lot of people prior to this news coming out that were wondering, okay, Lions have about, $40, $50 million worth of cap space. That's a decent amount of money, but they also have a lot of guys they have to find a way to extend here pretty quickly. They got to extend Hutch. They got to extend Kirby. They got to extend J-Mo. Da-da-da-da-da-da. It's like, that's going to cost money. Where are you going to find the money? Well, think about it. You now have the ability to do that easily. When you get an extra $22 to $26 million worth of cap space to work with, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind the Lions are going to be able to get all those contracts taken care of. Absolutely no doubt in my mind. Because you can get all of those guys for decent deals, probably below what the average market price is, except maybe for Hutch. Kirby, I would also argue on that one as well, but the reason why I'm saying you could probably get him less is because that's what we know Brad Holmes does. He is an excellent negotiator, and these players realize that they're going to have to take less, not, substantially less, but they're going to have to take less if they want to make sure there's more money to go around for the rest of the team. Well, when you think about it from that perspective, that's absolutely terrific news because it already means, number one, that we don't have to worry about losing guys that we absolutely want to keep. And it's good news more so than just that. Because, okay, obviously, number one, you want to retain your homegrown players. This is one of the problems that the Lions had for a number of years prior to Brad Holmes getting into office as far as the GM. We had no ability to, first and foremost, draft guys, grow them, and then retain them. If by some miracle we were able to actually find a player that was actually, semi-decent and actually turn him into something, chances are by the time he was ready to, be done with his rookie contract, he was looking somewhere else. He was not trying to stay here in Detroit. Now we don't have to worry about that. Now we have the ability to not only draft talent, grow that talent, but then retain that talent so that way it maintains the roster integrity. And it maintains that, esprit de corps, that camaraderie ship. Because the longer you can keep guys together, the better the roster has cohesion. So that's number one. Number two, again, this is building off of what we saw last year, but think about this, folks. What is one thing that all NFL players pay attention to? It's around this time of year, they're paying attention to who's getting paid. Not necessarily because of the fact that they're getting paid, but they're paying attention to how teams are paying them. Well, think about it for the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions have proven that they are willing to pay their guys with solid contracts if they perform. So if you think about it, you now have sent out a message last year, plus you're about to send out another message that, hey, if you perform well for us, you're going to be rewarded. You're going to get good contracts. That is a message that every freaking NFL player responds to instantaneously. Because again, it's a negotiating game. These freaking NFL owners, some of them, some families that own certain teams, like the Bengals, for example, they are notorious for being cheapskates. They do not like to pay out their players. But other teams, like what the Lions are starting to do, have demonstrated that they have no problem whatsoever in paying players that do their jobs. That is instantaneously going to further increase the credibility of the Lions to get those top-notch players to want to come here. But then think about this as well, because that was point 2. Now we're getting to point 3. Think about this. The Lions last year, as I just said, we spent how much money? Think about this. If you take a look at the contracts we handed out last year, we handed out 5 pretty damn big contracts as far as re-signing players, extensions. We extended Jared Goff to a 4-year, $212 million contract. We extended Amon-Ra St. Brown to a 4-year, $120 million contract. We extended Aleem McNeil to a 4-year, $97 million contract. Taylor Decker to a 3-year, $60 million contract. And Graham Glasgow to a 3-year, $20 million contract. That's a lot of money. In fact, you want to know how much money it is? It's $509 million in new expenditures that the Lions handed out in extensions last year. So wait a minute here. This is where the true genius really comes to light. Think about this, folks. The Lions spent over $500 million last year in new contracts, and yet they have even more cap space than what they had last year. Think about this, folks. This is the truly wild part about this. This is the truly genius part about this for the Detroit Lions. Last year, when the numbers came out, how much the cap was going to go up prior to what the Lions had, when the cap figures came out for last year, the Lions had $63.7 million in total cap space and $55.9 million in effective cap space. So last year, We had 63.7 and 55.9. Well, wait a minute. What did I just say those numbers were for this year? The Lions are going to have at a minimum, $10 million more in total cap space than what they had last year, and they're going to have at a minimum almost $15.5 million more in effective cap space than what they had last year. Think about that. We spent $500 million in new contract money, and we have more cap space than what we had last year. For most people that don't understand how the cap space works, that sounds absolutely bewildering. But in actuality, if you spend money on the back end of contracts, or actually get the contracts out of the way, it actually opens up cap space. But just from a simple, common sense perspective, you spend all that money and yet somehow now you have even more of it. That's just the true genius of how this is working out. The Lions spent a crap ton of money last year, and now they have even more money to play with. That is the true genius of this whole situation. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, I'm going to say this right now. Why fans should really be excited about this other than that is, and I know I have to bring this up because I already know somebody's going to talk about it, and I would be absolutely a fool and remiss if I didn't talk about this. The fact that I know a lot of Lions fans are going to be particularly excited about this is because now it's like, okay, you can no longer use the argument that cap space is a reason as to why you can't go out and get Max Crosby or Myles Garrett. And you know what? You can't. When you've got an extra $20 to almost $30 million of cap space now floating around in your back pocket, you can make a trade like that absolutely happen. Because the cap space now is almost a non-existent conversation starter if you're talking about an argument. Because if I've got an extra $20 million just chilling in my back pocket, yeah, of course, now I can afford a Myles Garrett. Now I can afford a freaking, Max Crosby without affecting the ability to go and, pay the guys I've already got. But the problem is still the same. And it's going to come back to what I've said before. Whether or not Holmes is willing to make the trade, determined if he's wanting to make the trade by surrendering the draft capital. That's where this conversation now all comes down, because you can't use the cap space argument. Now it's going to come down to whether or not Brad Holmes wants to actually make the trade by surrendering the draft capital, which means now the conversation, the argument is going to get even more focused. It's going to get even more heated, because now you can't say, well, there's multiple reasons as to why he couldn't do it. No, now there's only really one reason why he shouldn't do it, and that's the draft capital. Because the cap space, that literally just got wiped off in literally an instant. Now, whether or not the Lions decide to pursue a trade for Garrett or Crosby or one of the Bosa brothers or one of the Watt brothers, I don't know. Again, I've stated it before. Like I said this morning, I will state it again now. I have nothing against the trade. If Brad Holmes is for it, then that's all I need. But other than that, it's like, listen, if you're going to try and push that argument, you're going to probably be fighting uphill on that one, because that's just typically not what Brad Holmes has done. But again, he might throw a curveball. He's done that in the past. But despite the trade option, there are other options that now the Lions have more availability for, and that's in free agency. Because again, I've talked about this. Chances are, even with the increase in cap, you're going to have teams that are going to be looking at certain situations that are like, man, do we really want to pay this vet this kind of money? Do we want to save that money and potentially go somewhere else? There are going to be good free agents that are going to get cut this year. It is going to happen. And now it's like, okay, the Lions have $70+ million to work with here. The Lions are a player destination. So I know some of them are going to be like, well, David, all these other teams now have all this money. So what? They don't have the allure that the Lions have of, number one, being a Super Bowl contender, but also, number two, having a great culture, a franchise quarterback, an absolutely stacked already to death roster. I mean, that's hard to contend with. There's only going to be a few teams that can really contend on that point. So the Lions, even though they might not have as much cap space as, say, like teams like, the freaking Patriots, the Patriots are still rebuilding. So yeah, you know what? Have $146 million in cap space. That's great, grand, and glorious. You can throw as much money as you want at certain players, and that might be enough to get them to come. We've already played that nonsense with the Detroit Lions, for a number of years. But here's what I can tell you. The less money you have to pay for these top contracts for, these top players, the better. But my point is this. More cap space, you have a strong coaching staff, you have a winning mindset, you have a rich culture, you have all the players you already need here. The Lions are in a perfect position to exploit themselves, to put themselves even further into that category of being a Super Bowl champion. Now, I know some people are going to say, well, what about the Eagles? What about the Ravens, the Chiefs, and all that other nonsense? Listen, I don't give a damn about them. You want to know why? Because they don't give a damn about us. They're more focused on themselves. But here's what I will tell you. Just to point this out there, even with the increase in cap, it's going to be problematic for teams like the Chiefs, teams like the Eagles, because they still are not going to have nowhere near as much cap space as the Lions have. If I recall correctly, I think the Eagles were sitting just under $20 million of total cap space before the estimate came out. So now they'll be sitting just underneath $40 million, which, yeah, that's fair and fine and glorious, but they've got a whole bunch of guys they got to still pay, and they still got a draft class and everything else. So that $40 million is going to run up pretty quickly. Having $70 million is a hell of a lot more different. And I know some people are going to say, well, you're just completely, underestimating Howie Roseman. I'm not. I'm just simply letting you know that's how the cap space works. You think you have it until you don't, and especially when you got all these players you've got to pay, it's going to run up pretty quickly. Because I can tell you this right now. Eagles players do not have the same mindset about cap as the Lions players do. That I can tell you for a fact. The Lions players have always been more respectful of taking less money than the Eagles have. But my whole point is this. When you take a look at how Brad Holmes, Mike Disner, the entire front office, Chris Spielman have handled themselves, the fact that we now have the amount of money we have and we are still one of the best teams in position to make a Super Bowl run, that's pure brilliance. That is true genius right there. And the Lions should absolutely feel magnificent about themselves because now they are literally back in the driver's seat of being, okay, we can do damn near anything we want. And all we got to do is just put ourselves out there and sell ourselves like we used to in the past, which if that's how they're going to do it, as they've always done it, they're not going to have any problem continuing to make this roster into a Super Bowl roster. Can guarantee you that 100% of the time. But anyway, folks, I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to watch the next episode. Also encourage you all to do one of these three things, like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, I want to highly encourage you all, please make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that way you never miss any more content that I push out. Also want to highly encourage you all, please make sure you share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you possibly can. The more we can share it, the greater the channel can grow and spread. And with that, folks, I hope everybody got something out of the content. I hope you all enjoyed it. Whether it's your first time watching me or you guys have been watching me forever and a day, I truly hope you got something out of it. Also hope everybody out there has got something in their life that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.